Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are just doing a very quick video. Red just came out with their new flagship camera, the V-Raptor. This has kind of exploded over the internet, at least everything that I'm seeing on social media, YouTube, what have you. It's all over the place. And so as a Red Komodo user, I just want to do a video just kind of talking a little bit about the V-Raptor, seeing what some of the similarities are, what some of the differences are, how much of an upgrade it is. They're calling the V-Raptor the big brother to the Red Komodo. And so it's the same kind of lineup as the Komodo. It's that series of cameras that they've started, but just an upgraded version of the Komodo. The way that I've heard it explained, which I think is a pretty valid description of it, is that the Red Komodo was almost, though it was a great camera on its own, it was almost a test to see, if there was a market for this specific camera, if they could get more market share by having a more affordable camera with these higher specs and having a Red camera that was more accessible for the general public. And so it seems like the Komodo was almost like a trial run for this type of camera. And then once they put the Komodo out, they were basically able to get all the feedback from people that have used it and to see, okay, now that we've kind of put out this lower level camera, it's still an amazing camera, but a lower level camera in comparison to what they're used to, they're able to learn like what's working, what isn't working, what's important to our users, what is not. And then they're able to put together this V-Raptor, this basically upgraded Komodo. And if you've seen the specs at all, it definitely is an upgrade, but it also comes with quite a price jump. And so for me, purchasing the Red Komodo, the Komodo comes in around 5-6 grand American, 5-6 grand USD. Now the V-Raptor comes in just shy of 25 grand US. And so it's quite a jump. It's almost, 5 times the price of the Komodo. And so we're going to be talking today a little bit about what that actually entails, what some of the features are that they added, what the specs are on this camera, just do a brief overview just to keep you guys updated. But maybe you've seen all of this online already. But if not, hopefully this can be something that kind of piques your interest, gets you a little bit more familiar with what this camera is all about. So let's go ahead and dive onto Red's website here. You can see that right now in this stage of production, they've rolled out, similar to with the Komodo, a Stormtrooper lineup. And so we have the white here on the V-Raptor, similar to what they did with the Komodo. And then their normal production units, I'm assuming, will be some sort of black or dark gray or something along those lines. Something to note about the V-Raptor is they have a new Red Pro CF Express card that you'll need to use for this camera. So that's something that, going from the Komodo to the V-Raptor, you're not going to be able to use the exact same CFast cards, which is a bit of a bummer. It would be nice if you could just buy the exact same type of cards, and it would be workable for both cameras if you were to own both cameras, considering it's in the same lineup and these cameras would pair really well together. It would just be nice if there's a little bit of integration there, but I do get it, considering what this camera can shoot, the frame rates, the resolution, all of that. I get that they needed to go a little bit further. They needed a new card to be able to keep up with the right rates and right speeds. And so anyway, they have this new card, the Red Pro CF Express. They have a 660 gig version right now. They've announced that there's a 1.3 terabyte version on the way. And so considering how much data this camera is going to use when shooting at these higher frame rates, you'll probably want that card depending on what you're shooting. They also have a DSMC touchscreen monitor that they have built out for this camera. So with the Komodo, they exclusively did third party. They had partnerships with Small HD, and there's some other companies that also made a Red integrated monitor with Red control on it. But for them, they've actually made a native Red monitor for this camera, similar to what they have with their other lineups. And so basically what you can do is buy this monitor and it wirelessly will connect and have integration with the V-Raptor, at least from what I can tell and what they advertise it as. I've never used this monitor. I don't own this camera, so I'm speculating at this point, but that's what it seems like, what they're communicating. Similar to other Red monitors where you can just connect it and it's all kind of integrated, and they have wireless connectivity. And so yeah, that's great. So it's all just you plug it in and it works, and it's integrated very, very well. And so that's something that is awesome, and I'm looking forward to. The only thing that I've heard about Red monitors is that they can be a little bit laggy sometimes, so the touchscreen isn't the most responsive. So that's a little bit of a drawback there. But based on that it's very, very similar to the Komodo, I would assume, but I'm not 100% sure, that you might be able to connect, like for me, I have the Indy 7 for my Red Komodo. You might be able to connect something like the Indy 7 and still be able to get control on this camera. I'd have to look into that a little bit more, see what they release in the next little bit. But you might be able to double that. That's something that I might look at doing. I already have the Indy 7. If I was to get this camera, probably not anytime soon because I just bought the Komodo, but if I was to get this camera, that's something that would be kind of advantageous, being able to swap monitors between cameras. That would be a real win there. Because this monitor from Red is $3,000 for just the monitor, which, I mean, in perspective of the price of the camera, that's not too bad, but that's still $3,000 that you're, putting into a monitor just to see what you're shooting. Also for the V-Raptor, a little bit different from the Komodo that took the Canon BP batteries. They have a V-mount just built onto the camera, which in comparison to some of Red's higher lineups, this is actually great that it's completely built in. Typically you would need to buy a separate system just to get V-mount compatibility. And so you would have to buy a separate unit just to get batteries on your camera, and those units would cost a lot. And so having a V-mount plate built into the camera itself is amazing. And then they also have Red approved and Red built V-mount batteries that you can buy, but basically any V-mount battery technically should work. Red obviously has specific ones that they have approved, just like they do with everything, but let's be honest, you probably can use any V-mount battery you want, and it should technically work. So let's dive in a little bit to the specs of the camera. So this camera can shoot an 8K resolution. It can shoot that in RAW, which is incredible, similar to some of Red's other cameras. It has 17 stops of dynamic range, which is amazing. The Komodo advertised with 16 plus stops. Obviously, when camera manufacturers advertise dynamic range, they may boast a little bit. Every camera manufacturer seems to measure dynamic range slightly different, so you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt. But Red has an incredible dynamic range. In their cameras, it is amazing, it is awesome. So if the Komodo, which when you see the footage, the dynamic range is unreal, has 16 stops, or at least that's what they advertised as, maybe it's probably more like 15. But if they are advertising a 17, you can probably assume that it's somewhere around 16, which is higher than the Komodo. And so that is amazing as well. That's really, really great to see. That for me is a huge win. Dynamic range is something that as you get higher and higher and higher in your filmmaking, dynamic range starts to matter more and more than, say, something like resolution. I would rather have a camera that shoots really solid 1080 or 4K that has a really high dynamic range than a camera that shoots 8K and doesn't have as great of a dynamic range. And that's just something that, especially as we've taken a lot of a shift to digital media, we view things on smaller screens a lot of the times now, so you're not going to notice that resolution as much, whereas dynamic range, you can see that on any device that you're watching it on, so I would say that is probably much more important than your resolution. So yeah, again, that's great to see, 17 stops, love it. The mount type is an RF mount, similar to the Komodo, actually the exact same to the Komodo, and so that to me is a win. Some people were kind of complaining that, hey, they should at least be able to have the option to have a PL mount or something like that. But the nice thing with the RF mount and why they did it with the Komodo is because you can adapt to basically anything with RF. You can adapt to EF, you can adapt to PL, you can adapt to basically any mount that you want. And so this is great. I think this is actually a really good move on their part. You can just adapt similar to what they've done with the Komodo, and I'm sure that there'll be, you know, approved adapters that you can buy, and that'll be great. You can even just use the Canon adapter, which a lot of people have been using, and that works great too. There's a breakthrough photography one that you can buy as well, and so that is awesome. For me, I use mainly EF glass, and I use the adapter from RF to EF. And that's great too, because the one that I have has a variable ND filter built into it. And that to me is a great way to work. Like I love working with variable NDs. Obviously you have to be careful. If you go too far with variable NDs, you can get color shifts. And so you have to kind of, you know, monitor yourself and not go too far with it. But it's such a dream to work with, just being able to adjust your exposure in those little micro adjustments. You're not having to change your ISO or your, you know, shutter angle or anything like that. Not that you would want to adjust your shutter angle, but anyway, point stands, you don't have to do these, you know, adjustments in, you know, going from 100 ISO to 200 ISO to 300 ISO, and you wish that you could be at, you know, 101 ISO or something like that. You can adjust, you know, just by rolling your variable ND, you can make those little micro adjustments, and it's great. It is amazing to work with. Highly would recommend it. That's the way that I work now. Most of my exposure adjustments are made via the ND. And so I love that that's going to be an option with the V-Raptor as well. As long as you can buy high quality VND adapters, then that is great, and I love it. Let's talk a little bit about frame rates. So I won't go through every single option here. You can read that on Red's website if you want. But one of the most impressive specs is that it can shoot 120 frames per second at an 8K resolution using the full sensor. And by the way, the full sensor on this camera is full frame. The 8K is full frame, which is such a win. I love that. And you can even shoot 6K at Super 35, which is the same as the Komodo. And so if you really want to match, you know, the Komodo and the V-Raptor, you can do that. You can shoot at 6K and have it be Super 35, and you're going to have the exact same crop factor on both of these cameras. And so that's pretty cool that you can do that. But, you know, might as well take advantage of that full frame 8K. That's doesn't get much better than that. You can also shoot up to 600 frames per second at 2K when you shoot anamorphic. So I'm guessing this is very similar to the video that I made that was talking a little bit about the Komodo and its setting to shoot 50 frames when you're in anamorphic at the full sensor size at 6K. So that's a little kind of thing that I found about the Komodo is specifically when you're in anamorphic and shooting 6K, you don't have any crop in on your image at all. And so that's kind of a similar concept to this camera. You know, at the 17:9 crop, you can only shoot up to 480 frames, but as soon as you bump over into that anamorphic, then you get a higher frame rate available at that 600 frames per second. Now, I've heard whispers that this might actually not have a crop on it when you shoot that 2K at 600 frames. I've heard whispers that this may not actually have a crop, which would be, everyone's been asking for this and wondering why Red did not include this in the Komodo. And so if they pulled this off, I will be so freaking happy, because that's a big bummer with the Komodo is as soon as you, if you downsample when you're shooting in ProRes, and you go, you know, from, you know, your 6K sensor to shooting 2K in ProRes, then there's no crop at all. It just uses that full sensor and it's great. But as soon as you start shooting in higher frame rates, then you start to have to switch into, you need to switch into 4K to get 60 frames, you need to switch into 2K to get 120 frames. And when you do that, you're cropping into the sensor. And so if they manage to include the ability to, you know, shoot in 2K 600 frames and not crop in on the sensor at all, that finally makes that setting very, very usable, which would be great. And I don't think we need that in Red RAW. I wouldn't be super concerned about that, but at least if you can offer that in ProRes, that gives the option to at least use that full frame at that higher frame rate. And I get that for, you know, recording speeds or just for not having weird kind of artifacting. I get why in your Red RAW you would just crop in on the sensor rather than downsampling. I do understand that. But if you're shooting in ProRes, I don't see why they couldn't just downsample that and at least have that option available. So hopefully that is the case here. I'm not going to go too much into the construction or weight or any of those kind of things. We already talked about the fact that it has V-mount batteries, V-lock batteries. It has DC power, just like the Komodo. That's great. Temperatures we don't really need to go into. Color management, so it has the same IPP2 processing as the Komodo, which is an absolute win. Again, I don't think I'm gonna get this camera, tomorrow or anything like that. I just got the Komodo. I'm loving it. It's doing the job for me. But this I see this camera, in a few years, getting this camera and the Komodo turning into a B camera, just as I upgrade my skills, grow my company. I do see the V-Raptor in the future, absolutely. And I see it being an incredible A cam for the work that I do, and having the Komodo be a very, very strong B camera, which sounds insane to say because it's such an amazing camera already. So to use it as a B camera seems a bit stupid and funny, but that's, if I had the V-Raptor, that's exactly what it would be. It would be the perfect B camera for that. And having the same image pipeline would make life so easy. It has the same or very similar color science, it has the same image processing pipeline, and so you can use the same kind of transformation LUTs, and then you'll be able to just make micro adjustments on exposure, just match your cameras when it comes to that. But it'll be very, very easy to match these cameras if you have an A and B cam, or if you just have shots from one camera and then from another camera from the same shoot. It'll make life so easy. The only thing easier would just be have the exact same camera, but this really gives you the best of both worlds. You can obviously have your very expensive, $25,000 V-Raptor, and then you can have a not quite as expensive Red Komodo, but that shoots basically or a very similar image, especially for interviews and stuff like that. And then when you're needing high frame rates and that extra capability for the V-Raptor, you have that available to you. The V-Raptor is also compatible with the Red Control app. That has been such a win for the Red Komodo. It's so easy to use. What an incredible app. Just the parameters that you have available to you, what you can adjust within the app is great. You have basically full control of the camera within that app. And so that's a real win there as well. Often when I'm shooting on the Red Komodo, if I'm the only person on site, or if I'm shooting stuff for myself, it's very frequently that I will use the app and use it to, tap my autofocus points, use it as a monitor to adjust lighting, all of that kind of stuff. And so that's super helpful that that's available on the V-Raptor as well, and that it's the same app, same technology there. And as far as monitor options, we already talked about the Red touchscreen that will be available. And then there's also a touchscreen integrated on the camera, but it's a 2.4 inch LCD. And so it's not huge, and it also does not have video preview. And I don't know why it would. It's on the side of the camera. It's not very helpful if it did have video preview, so it's not like that matters anyway. And for a screen that size, you would be buying an external monitor regardless, similar to the Komodo. So that doesn't really matter to me. You can just adjust some parameters on there, and that's great. Get through the menu systems, and then you can actually have full preview and control on the integrated touchscreen. And so that's pretty much it for me. That's just kind of a brief overview of this camera, some of the specs that it has, just my comparison to what the Komodo has versus the V-Raptor. In my opinion, this is worth the money. I have not seen specs on a camera like this in this price range at all. They really innovated with this camera. I'm very excited about it. Like I said though, I'm very happy with the Red Komodo. I don't see myself needing to upgrade to this camera anytime soon, but I do think it is in the future. I think this is the camera that I will upgrade to next after the Komodo. I just don't think it needs to be right now. I don't really have the need for it at this particular moment in time. But for 25 grand, though that is a hefty price point, not necessarily in comparison to the rest of Red's cameras, but just for buying a camera, that is a lot of money to put down. But considering what's included in it, that is a really good price point. 8K, 120 frames. You tell me another camera that shoots that costs this price range, that costs 25 grand. Yeah, that's USD, so 30 grand Canadian, but still, it's pretty unreal that this camera exists right now and is only this much money. obviously not for everyone. Not everyone needs these specs. Not everyone needs this capability in a camera. But for those that do, this is a steal. This is an incredible deal that Red has offered. And that's what I love about Red, is they just keep innovating. I love that, you know, they took over the cinema market. Obviously, Arri is a big player in that as well. But Red really came through, made these amazing digital cinema cameras that people now often use rather than film. Just an incredible innovation. And creating Red RAW and just all the positives that come with that. That is probably the best RAW codec that exists today. They innovated in that field, then moving on to the Komodo, making their package just way smaller, being able to fit their technology into such an incredibly small package and offering it at a price point where a lot of, you know, professional videographers rather than, you know, filmmakers or production, you know, studios could actually afford. That was incredible. And now taking the step, piggybacking off of the Red Komodo, now making the V-Raptor, just really coming through with some incredible specs on this camera, coming through with, you know, dynamic range, frame rates, color science, having their RAW capability. Like, all of this is packed into such a tiny little package that's, you know, barely bigger than the Red Komodo. Yeah, they've been innovating a lot, and it just seems like they're really coming through, and I just believe in Red as a company. Now that I've started kind of investing in them, getting the Red Komodo, kind of shifting over to using them for the company that I use for my cameras, I could not be happier at this point. Like, they just seem to really be innovating, pushing boundaries, and also just making it more accessible, which I think is incredible for the future of filmmaking. I think there's some really exciting productions, films, movies that will be made with this camera, and I think that is very exciting. I find that exciting. Anyway, that's all that I have for you. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.